Curious as to what it takes to lead a highly engaged team through a high burnout industry like healthcare? Then you'll want to tune into this episode where I interview a workforce development leader who shares his insights as to how he is able to lead one of the highest engaged teams in his region. Let's dive in. Welcome back to another episode of The Leader Within. Today, I'm excited to introduce Geoffrey M. Roche, a diversity advocate, a heart leader who is focused on empowering collaboration through empathy and uniting diverse perspectives for groundbreaking solutions. Currently, he's a director of workforce development at Siemens Healthineers. With his leadership and advisory experience, I'm excited to have him share his insights with you. Well, welcome, Geoffrey. Can you share a little bit about your story and just what really has helped you with the trajectory of your career?
Absolutely. Thank you, Angela. And thank you for, for this important space, for such an important conversation. Yeah, when I look back on my career, so much of what has helped me, I would say, really has been the foundation of mentorship. I was really fortunate in my first job when I served initially as the community relations coordinator at my healthcare system, which was Pocono Health System, to have both a senior vice president and a CEO who truly not just recognized something in me, but cared enough to want to really focus intentionally on mentorship. And they would, spend a lot of time with me. They would challenge me. They would put me on new projects, new tasks. They would have me lead initiatives that I would have never really wanted to lead. But it was very, very thoughtful and sincere because they knew that it would help grow me into what I am today.
That's pretty incredible. And at any point in time, because being like a young professional and having that seniority of a leadership be open and mentoring you, did you at any point battle with, oh man, like how am I gonna live up to this, or like any of that internal monologue, or did it just, you're like, hey, like this is awesome, and didn't even think much of it?
It's such an interesting question because to your point, I did have a lot of challenges from the vantage point of could I live up to it? And also really internally, I was always telling myself that I wasn't good enough to live up to it. That was actually something that I was challenged with for quite some time, that idea, that imposter syndrome. And when I look back on it, I sincerely believe that there were some moments when some of those leaders recognized it. And I can remember one of them where I just did not want to take on the initiative because I just felt I just didn't have it in me. And I remember my senior vice president actually sitting back in his chair. And he always had these moments when you knew if he was going to cross his hands and he sat back, he was going to reflect and share stories with you. And I remember him pulling back and him saying something to the effect of, Geoffrey, I've been in your shoes too. But here's the deal. I will walk alongside you and help you to accomplish this. But I know and want you to be the leader of this initiative. And I know that through you, not only will we accomplish it, but we'll accomplish it in bringing a team together that will have the best experience possible. And I remember at that moment, I could tell he knew what I was facing, and he was not going to let that internal battle win, but that we were going to win together. And I think without question, I shouldn't say I know without question, that was one of those moments for me that was like, I got this. And more importantly, we've got this.
That is such a beautiful example of just what leadership can do for individuals and honestly the trajectory of your career, right? Because when I think back to if they hadn't taken a risk on you because they're like, he might be too junior, I would be curious as to how quickly you would have been able to honestly live up to your potential and then help them make an impact. So when it comes to your leadership experience, then like what has shaped your leadership approach?
Yeah. Those experiences and certainly that mentorship, without question, certainly have impacted my leadership approach. When I think of my nurse CEO, who was the CEO that I talked about earlier, Kathy was the type of leader who always led with heart. She had such passion, but also purpose. And what she instilled in me, particularly the 5 years that I had the blessing and opportunity to work and serve with her, were those qualities. And so to your earlier point, I'm very focused on the idea of leading with heart. That aspect was something I learned with Kathy, and I saw it every day. I saw her connect with our teams. I saw her connect with our nurses. I saw her connect with patients and families. And I saw her always say, there will be days where people won't be happy with the decisions that I make, but there will also be times where they will recognize and appreciate the relationships that I built and the relationships that I've made. And I saw her in her way of leading always focus on that powerful, authentic aspect of connection. And that absolutely is so much of who I am today. And so I always say, I probably would not necessarily have that same caliber or same level of purpose and commitment if I didn't have that unique experience. Now, the short, interesting aspect to that, if I analyze it, go back 16 years, which is when it started, is I have not seen a leader like her all these years later. And so I'm so thankful that I had that in the first job, and then I had that for 10 years. Because those 10 years, even though she wasn't as the CEO for 10, she was CEO for 5, but my same senior vice president was there that entire time. And I'm so thankful that I had that type of leaders to look up to and to truly follow. And that's an important distinction, because I will not usually say to people follow. But for me, I had people that was a joy to follow. And they always were trying to challenge me to do better and be better. And so when people say, how do I pay it forward? I do the same exact thing with the teams that I lead. I do the same exact things with people that I work with. It's truly about us and we, and me being there to help them. And sometimes me getting into good trouble with other leaders when I feel that they are not doing what is right by their teams. And so, that's how I would describe that.
Okay, let's dive into that a little bit deeper, because when I think of heart leadership, and you always encounter like a spectrum of leaders, right? And so when it comes to some heart leaders, they're so great with being that peacekeeper, but when it comes to driving results or dealing with some of those uncomfortable conversations, they sometimes like steer away from that, right? And unfortunately, as a leader, you need to be able to have those difficult conversations. So for you, as you were developing your leadership style, keeping in mind that heart leadership is important, how did you drive results, understanding that you're going to have those not so great conversations in the process?
Yeah, I will tell you that I'm a firm believer in crucial conversations. In fact, I tell everybody to always take the Crucial Conversations training. Love the book and love all the aspects about it. That experience for me was very important. Early on in my healthcare leadership, I went through Crucial Conversations. I actually did it 2 times. I did it early on in my journey, and then our director of organizational development said, as my teams grew, I want you to do it again, because I want to see and I want you to self-reflect. How are you making so much progress, but yet having the highest engagement scores in the healthcare system? But also you are holding people accountable. And so to your point, what I learned was you can hold people accountable and still do it with love. You can hold colleagues accountable and still be respectful and do it with empathy and do it with compassion. I think so often leaders, to your point, there's those who want to be really, really kind, but it's hard for them to think, well, how do I hold them accountable? They're my peers. But what I learned was ultimately, as humans, we want to be challenged. And so it's all about how you do that, though. For example, I worked and served with a senior vice president that, as I said, had the highest results, highest engagement area in the entire healthcare system, but also very, very high goals. High goals. He set goals for himself that were high. He set goals for every one of his direct reports that were very significant. And so I did the same. I set significant goals for my teams, but I never let them feel as if they were alone to achieve them. And what I did is I was incredibly transparent, because my senior vice president was transparent and our CEO was transparent. So we would know what she was challenging Steve to do, and I would know what Steve was challenging me to do, and my team would know what Steve was challenging Geoffrey to do. And I think that's where we lose a lot of value here. We're not transparent enough in a lot of organizations today. We roll out these goals, but we don't help everyone understand how we're going to align them across the top, and that it's not just about top bottom, but frankly, if we all achieve them here, we all benefit, irregardless if it's top bottom, bottom up. And so for us, it was really that aspect of just genuine connection. And then the final point I would make is the idea that even my senior vice president was not afraid to get his hands dirty and roll up those sleeves and come with the team and show them how he was contributing to ultimately us doing it. And the same thing for me. And I'll never forget an experience once. he had this amazing quality about him that he would pull people that reported to me directly in, and he would just ask them a couple key questions. And he was always getting at, are his leaders following what he expects of them? And I remember at first being nervous. Oh my gosh, like this is going to be an aha moment for me. Something's going to happen. He pulled me in once on a 101, and I'll never forget it. And I walked in and I thought, oh boy, because I had just heard from a team member that they were in there. And I come in and he could tell I was like a little off. And he said, what are you worried about? He's like, I have never met a leader that is more in touch with his team in all my years at this healthcare system. He said, and you know why I did it? Because I wanted to make you feel a little uncomfortable. And I was like, well, you did. And he goes, I'm so happy. Goal accomplished. What's the next one? I'll surprise you the next time. But what I learned in that was I was there to serve. And my team knew, look, there were days where they weren't happy with me. We all know that happens. But they knew that I always had their back and that they also always had my back. But to your point, it was genuine connection.
I'm curious because you said you had one of the highest engagement scores out there, which like kudos to you because that requires a lot of work, right? And especially in an industry where burnout can be extremely high. So for yourself, what would you say is one of the key things that other leaders can apply to be able to accomplish a similar result?
Yeah. The first thing I think is you have to have purpose and intention in everything that you do. And your team has to see your true self in every part of that. And what I mean by that is that you've got to show up and be there for them. I had very different type of team that I was leading. Some were clinical, some were non-clinical, some were strategic, some were media type of relations, roles, public health professionals in our healthcare system. And then I had the entire EMS service line, EMTs and paramedics, that reported up to a clinical leader who reported to me. Very diverse group of 60 some professionals. And what was very clear was some were college educated, some were high school educated, some didn't graduate high school. Some had a college degree, some had certifications, but we were all people. And so what always was vital was, first of all, I'll give you an example. When I helped create the EMS service line, one of the first things the team member said to me is, can you lose your suit? And I was like, lose my suit? Like, this is who I am. I'm a leader in this healthcare. And they said, but around us, like, do you see how we're dressed? Like, we want to see you more like us. And I remember saying to my clinical leader, I was like, lose my suit. And she goes, Geoffrey, I see you on the weekends. You're not wearing a suit. What's so important about your image today that you can't do it? And so I did. And I would go on the rigs with them, and I would get to know them, and I would socialize with them, and I would bring food to them, and I would hang out with them. I would listen to them. I would make sure that as they were hearing about things in our healthcare system, that they were hearing it from me. But I was also making sure the executive team was sharing it with them, just as if they were part of us, because they were. And so I think it's that aspect of intention. And the final point I would make is be real. We all are people, and I would be honest with them. If there was a day where I was making a mistake, I would apologize, and they would know about it. The other thing I would often do is pretty regularly, I would send out appreciation notes. And I had learned that from another executive, where every Friday I would make a purpose intention to send out an appreciation note, so that I would do a group one and then I would do individual ones. Yes, a lot of work, but it went a long way to show that I recognized their efforts that week. And when appropriate, I would go above and beyond and make sure executive leadership would know about their efforts, because I always knew there was going to be a moment where some of them may have an opportunity to go on a different team. And I wanted to provide that opportunity that others would know that they were being recognized. And I'll never forget a colleague in HR saying, wow, you recognize your people a lot. And I said, that's what you should do. You all should be recognizing. It's called human resources for a reason. Don't just do benefits, recruiting, blah, blah, blah. You need to be also focused on people. And so, but again, I learned that from the leaders that I had.
Kudos to you for doing that, because I learned more times than not, people like to send feedback when they're frustrated or not impressed with something, right? When there is a moment where they do something that is above and beyond or like behaviors that you're like, I want to reinforce this, right? Like I think those are the key moments that you have to take a moment and share that feedback and actually let them know about it, right? It's not just keeping it
Hmm.
inside. And then just kind of see like that spark in them where they're like, yeah, like I'm gonna do that again, right? I think is something that people underestimate, and it's so much better than a pizza party, to be quite honest. Um, and from your perspective, then, what would you say is one of the biggest challenges that leaders face when it comes to like creating space for that? Because I think about specifically that transparency piece, right? As we were talking through all that, some leaders are better than others at being transparent. And I've always been curious. I was like, well, why at that level do you think that people are ignorant sometimes to what they actually need to do a better job? Right. So I'm curious from your perspective again, what helps you be comfortable with transparency and how you gauge when it's appropriate to be transparent versus when you're like, okay, now I have to stick to the script, right?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I have always learned is in my hospital days, particularly, is I would just ask my senior vice president or the CEO, like, is this something that I can share with the team? And there were times where they'd say, and they would hem and haw, and they would say, well, if you're sharing it with me, in what way will it harm us if I share it with the team? And then there were legal times where other situations where I couldn't. But I would always ask that question because maybe I was too transparent at times, but I felt that if we were collectively going to advance all the strategic initiatives, particularly because of the function we were in, that they needed to know. And there were certainly times where I couldn't give them the full menu, but it could help them understand enough to get a glimpse. But they also knew that if it was something I couldn't talk on, they knew because they just knew I was such an honest person in that way. But I think, ultimately, it also sends a message, particularly, and I'll tell you truthfully, because when we would have some of the biggest types of things, our senior vice president would actually meet with the entire division and he would deliver it. And he wouldn't just deliver it in an email. He wouldn't just deliver it in a scripted way. He would sit in like a fireside chat. And again, speaks to the type of leader he is. And he would do it virtual at times if we had people that were at other campuses. But whether you were there in person or you were virtual, it was sincere. And he would give the information and then he would stop. And he would say to everyone, what's on your mind? Anything and everything. Whatever is on your mind, whether it's to this topic or anything else, let's talk about it. And he would go around that room. Nobody left without an opportunity because he always believed if someone walked out and didn't have an opportunity, it would lead to other challenges for us as an organization. And so because of who he was, people were more apt. As I said, sometimes we pull people in. There were also times where people on my own team would just go see him. People on the other parts would just go see him. And so, I think that made a big difference too. I'll tell you, to the earlier point, just to tell a story that always resonates with me. I had a team member who had been in our organization for a very long time. And I fought very hard when I inherited her on the team after a reorganization that I knew she was apt to be promoted. I just knew it. And so when we were developing the EMS service line, she was an integral member of that team. In fact, to this day, wouldn't have happened without her. I tell her that all the time. But HR was not giving any leeway to promote because she didn't have a college degree. In their eyes, to be a manager, you had to have a college degree. Not in my eyes. And I was not going to give up. And I remember our chief human resource officer said, wow, you are relentless. And I said, I'm going to get this. And so I did my homework, kept doing my homework, and I realized that our CIO didn't have a college degree. And so I didn't go to HR without talking to him first because I had a lot of respect for him. And I said, hey, I need your help because I know you like to pay it forward for others. And I said, you know this employee? And he said, oh, yeah. I said, I want to promote her, but at this time, I'm getting resistance. Will you help me? He did. And we got her promoted. And we changed the trajectory of that. She was a single mom, became a manager, did a phenomenal job. But I didn't stop there because I knew the support that she had in the EMS community. So we were planning a community-wide, hundreds of people event to support all of EMS. It was a fundraiser. And obviously it was my quote unquote event as the director of the area. But it really was about her. And I knew that. And but she didn't know that. And so she came into the event. She was kind of a little worried, like, oh boy, what's going to happen here? Because she knew I was always up to something. But what she didn't realize was every aspect. And so as the evening went on, I had an opportunity. I had, made sure the executive team knew we were going to do this. And I started with some remarks, and then I brought an EMS colleague up to provide some remarks. And I then honored her with the prestigious recognition that an employee would get, with a standing ovation of the entire room. And because she didn't like attention, I made her come up in front of all. And afterwards, she had said to me, she said, first of all, I hate you, but really I love you. And she said, and I'm so glad you challenged me too, because I don't like that kind of stuff. And I said to her, but did you notice that room? Did you notice all the support that you had in that room? And she looked at me, she said, I can't believe what you did. And I said, no. It's what we did. And I can't tell you enough about what that moment meant for the whole organization and for the team. Because what they saw was this effort, which took a lot of work, a lot of sweat, a lot of tears, a lot of resources, but from our CEO up to our board and so on, what they saw was just this beautiful connection and tapestry of teamwork. And ultimately, it wasn't about me. It was all about we. And it was just awesome for everybody.
Kudos to you for advocating like that for her, because I can understand where HR was coming from like, she doesn't have a degree. But I think it's absolute bullshit. Because if you think about the number of leaders that are promoted without checking off every box, or those who actually are very well educated but have this great difficulty to effectively lead others because they're more great technically than they are people-wise, like, it speaks volumes into how the impact she made without even having that title yet, and then to be able to be recognized and then now actually have that title. Like, I can only imagine the impact she's making, right? So, and from your perspective, then what are one of the biggest challenges that you face in workforce development in the health space right now, especially with the advancement of technology and everything that's going on?
I think to your exact point that you just made is one of the biggest challenges we face, right? I mean, we've got the most challenging time of recruitment than we've ever faced in healthcare. At the same time, we have abundant and apparent culture challenges. And so much of that leads to very, very poor retention. But what it all comes back to really are very simple things around us as people. Healthcare, in my opinion, is an industry where for far too long we've ignored the systemic failures of leadership, because we didn't have to worry about the workforce challenges in the way that we have to today. And it's not just the pandemic, because the reality of it is before the pandemic, this was also starting. It got worse in the pandemic, but it comes down to some basic core tenets. If you have bad leaders, people will leave your organization. We see it all the time. We see it in data. We see it every day. And yet we don't see other leaders, and I'll add boards and shareholders and trustees at our healthcare systems, understanding that the CEO and the executive team have to be held accountable for those things. If I were a board member, I would be asking for those retention reports and those resignation reports, and I want to understand why. And don't just do an engagement survey to do an engagement survey, because here's the fact. We know many times those pecan surveys are not truly anonymous. And so when people don't feel safe, which unfortunately is a big issue today in the workplace, if they don't feel safe, they're not going to tell you their issues because they're worried about their job. And so we've got to get back to creating safety in the workplace systemically and systematically. And that really starts with having leaders who care about people. And that also starts with having leaders that represent the different generations. So you can't just have more seasoned leaders when you have also younger generations in the workplace, unless those leaders are going to have empathy and compassion. And instead of judging other generations, listen and learn from other generations. And so I say this as somebody that's led multiple generations throughout my career and was the youngest many times. You can do it if you lead with empathy and compassion. You can have outcomes, you can have results, you can do the best job possible, but do it together. And I just think today, unfortunately, healthcare has been a place where we've had some of the worst leaders, yet they're still there and they're ruining people's lives. And, engagement is terrible. And to your earlier point, burnout is through the roof. And yet we're still asking the same questions. And so for me, it pains me to think we have to ask those same questions. Every leader has to look themselves in the mirror, in my opinion, every day. And before they get into that workplace, should be asking a couple questions. One is, am I going to make it or break it for somebody today? Will I help them be successful, or will I cause them to be burned out? Will I change the structure, the technology, the processes that make it more difficult? Or will I be that champion to make it the best possible place for everyone? Will I be the type of leader that cares, or will I be the type of leader that only cares about myself? Like, these are some basic things. And I just think healthcare has to remember, first, it's about humanity. And when we answer that question every day, we have an opportunity to truly make it the best community that it can be, because it can. I do believe that, but we have to have that empathy and that true commitment to compassion for it to be.
Really great call outs. And I appreciate that you gave some food for thought when it comes to those reflection questions, right? Because it takes a lot of accountability in our end to be able to, first of all, if you're going to make someone's life harder, please just don't go to work today kind of feeling, right? In an unnecessary way, right? But I guess that ties into my second last question is, what do you think it takes to unleash an individual or an organization's potential then?
I think first you have to make, as we said, you have to make a psychologically safe environment. And then you have to really lead with this intentionality around courage and imagination. If you can create a safe culture and make people feel so confident, self-confident, I should say, that they can be who they are, you will see this idea of courageous imagination just so rampant in the workplace. And then through that, we'll see creativity and we'll see innovation. And what I love most about it is when those ingredients come together, we will see the best possible outcome for our patients or our consumers and our stakeholders. And the best part about it is that it's truly going to be that type of community then, where everyone that's working together is going to feel like, oh, I want to contribute too. I want to be a part of that. And so I can't stress enough this idea of really creating that safety and then infusing it with courageous imagination, because there's so much creativity that we all bring. We don't realize it, but when we really hone in on who we are, we all bring unique capabilities from a creative level, from an innovative level. And when we do that, it can be such a great place to be. But you've got to have leaders that also want to care and want to be a part of that.
And you just highlighted the business case for it, right? It's because when you're individuals that are on the front lines, they're engaged with the solutions, solving the problems for the people that you're serving. That's going to give you the competitive advantage to stay ahead of the game as you continue to go through a lot of those changes and challenges. So my last question to you is, what's one thing that you're working on that you're excited about?
There's definitely a lot. I'm definitely super excited about working, in the United States right now to really get a better solution on the apprenticeship space in healthcare. I'm a firm believer that healthcare on the workforce also needs more equity. We need to have equity in the workforce because not everyone can go to college and be in a 2 or 4 year program to get a degree. But why can't we harness the power of an apprenticeship option where they could actually learn and earn at the workplace? Because you do learn in the workplace, and you can get, there should be no reason a college can't accredit that because you're learning in the workplace. You can create a great system, and you can still find a way to bring that forward. And so I'm super excited to be a part of those initiatives. Not easy, because we also got to get accreditors buy-in, but I believe it's absolutely essential for a more sustainable workforce and also a more equitable one.
Really great call out, because if you think about the level of access that some people get to education for one, and then the rate in which information and problems are changing, by the time you're done a degree, sometimes you're just like, well, then that information wasn't as relevant anymore. I mean, the principles are there, right? But it's just to be able to actually be in the thick of it. So I'm excited to see what's to come out of that. And thank you again for sharing your insights and your story, Geoffrey. I really appreciate it. And to everyone else who's tuned in to another episode, thank you for your time and attention. It means more to me than you'll know. And I can't wait to stay in touch with you on my next episode. Till then, stay safe.